Hi everybody, hope you can soon enough see and hear me. Joining me here from York. So there's a few on. That's lovely, there's a few on. So do let me know when you see and hear me. I've just finished a Christmas tour, so actually I'm still in my Christmas garb. But I've put a woolly hat on to keep me warm through this because it's a fairly cold Christmas Eve here, so I'm due to. So we've got a few on. Hello, Linda from New York. How are we? And Tish, you see and hear me well. That's good. I'm having a bit of gimbalitis right now, so just try and bully the gimbal into seeing the world in the way that I want it to look. Ah, there we go. We've tamed the gimbal, which is never a given. We always hello, Janie. Janie's locally, and Susan's here, and Mitzi. And some lovely familiar names. Ronnie Lynn is with us, and Sarah is with us as well. So that's fantastic. I can hear the bell tolls. Do not ask for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. Hello, Fran. Natalie from the Netherlands is with us. And the gang's all here. So I think we'll kind of kick off because I know you've got Anna Catherine as well. No doubt, sketchbook to hand. And I think we'll kind of kick off because who's this? Singing Cheryl. Hello, Singing Cheryl. Are you going to sing with us this evening? I hope so. Let's see if we put you in a Christmassy mood. So let me just flick over. And my first little voyage out over Christmas, I've been meaning to take it out and about. So I thought to kind of make up for my kind of lack of presents, I'm going to do a two-parter. And we're going to talk about, of all things, the 12 Nights of Christmas. Because it's much talked about, but often we don't really know so much about the 12 Nights of Christmas. Trying to explore each of the days and come up with some interesting stories and tales and myths and legends and beliefs that associate some with the Christian church, some with pagan, some just things that have happened on those days. I thought it'd be kind of interesting. And as we do so, we're going to have a look into the shop windows, we're going to look at the lights, and just try and get you in a Christmassy mood, really. Because to be honest, if you're not in a Christmassy mood yet, and you're not buying this tour, there's not much we're going to have to do for you because it is awfully near Christmas now. We're a few hours away. So, Laurie, France going very well. We're back there in January, start ripping it all out and start again. So, 12 days of Christmas. So we're starting actually day 0 because Christmas Eve isn't actually a part of the 12 days of Christmas. It's day 0. But I thought, because I knew Linda and one or two others were on from the other side of the Atlantic, I'd talk a little bit about America. Because particularly New York, here in Old York, we sort of feel a little bit sort of under the shadow of New York, given your kind of Rockefeller Center Christmas tree and your Macy's windows and everything. If you remember, we used to get a be show. But did you know that the famous poem, "Twas the Night Before Christmas," about which this very tour has taken its name, was written in New York? It was written about 200 years ago. What's really interesting is he had visited New York rather than Old York 200 years ago. You'd have been very unlikely to see any decorations at all. It wouldn't have been like this at all. In fact, the publication was about to change all that, and it was named A Visit from St. Nicholas, often called "Twas the Night Before Christmas," because that's the first line of the poem. And it was a poem that was first published anonymously under the title and the account of a visit from St. Nicholas in 1823. And the author was a chap called Clement Clark Moore. And he was both a scholar, he was a property developer, he owned what has become the Chelsea district in New York, so very, very wealthy. And he was also a preacher, so he was very involved in the Protestant church. So consequently, he was on kind of very, very dodgy territory. And he was born in 1779 into the world of kind of genteel Protestant elites. People who viewed at that time Christmas as highly vulgar. They saw it as a kind of hangover from the kind of the Catholic Christian, too much rioting and drinking and riotous behaviour, and things are all together sort of unbecoming of the kind of polite society of New York that he kind of lived in. And this really had been passed down from the Puritans, who, of course, sort of a century earlier, 150 years earlier, had been the founding fathers of the colonies, the sort of 13 kingdoms that end up becoming the beginnings of the United States. So these Protestants had viewed sort of Christmas really as being about Catholic ignorance and deception. And they knew full well that there was pagan roots sitting below the surface. So they didn't really want any part whatsoever of Christmas. These Puritans kind of had a lingering anxiety that if you kind of gave people a reason, the excuse, the permission to celebrate Christmas, all manner of anarchy will be let loose. So consequently, for generations, it had been hidden away. Christmas was not celebrated in the United States. But this is all about to change with the publication of this novel, poem, which you think, how on earth is that possible? How does a poem change? Does that sound any better? Is anybody else getting sound issues? I'll just stay still for a second. I think that hopefully it'll just work its way through. Hi, Linda. So consequently, as I say, you've got this suspicion in the Puritans that Christmas is really about tomfoolery, it's about gambling, it's about drinking, it's about excess, it's about doing all the naughty things. Nothing you'd want to be doing to celebrate the birth of Lord Jesus Christ. So consequently, when Clement Clark Moore sits out to write this poem, "Twas the Night Before Christmas," he is treading on very, very thin ice. Indeed, he takes an altogether more generous perspective of Christmas, and it's said that he wrote it after he'd been out on a sleigh ride. So he was full of the kind of the Christmassy spirit, and no doubt pulled by reindeer. He decides to use the poem as an excuse to kind of dig over some of these old beliefs, these old stories, these pre-Christian pagan ideas. And he publishes the poem anonymously. So he doesn't have the courage of his conviction. He decides he's not going to go out under his own name as a well-to-do preacher, that he's writing about reindeer and gift givers and all these kind of ideas that have been kind of eschewed. But nonetheless, he loves the ideas, and he creates our sense of the modern Christmas. He borrows kind of aspects, I say the reindeer, the sleighs and so forth, but he's taking the idea of St. Nicholas, the gift giver, the Catholic Christmas. Washington Irving was his friend, and he'd already kind of portrayed the jolly old elf. And what's really interesting and clever about what Moore does is he sets it on Christmas Eve. Thank you, Natalie. Not Christmas Day. Because in doing so, he's able to sidestep the issue. Because you're not then about a celebration of Jesus. It's the night before Christmas that all these things happen. And as a result of this, people look at it and go, oh, it's okay. It doesn't get away with the narrative. It's a story for children. We'll enjoy telling it for children. And New Yorkers embraced it wholesale to the degree where today it is the worldwide capital of Christmas. It is celebrated like nowhere else on earth, with the possible exception, I suppose, of Bethlehem. But it's fascinating that it starts from an anonymous poem written by a preacher who challenges the orthodoxy, but very, very cleverly shifts the action from Christmas Day to Christmas Eve, and in doing so creates our love of modern Christmas. So I thought that was a kind of a nice little story to kind of get us started off with our kind of day zero. And we've talked lots and lots about Christmas Day, our Christmas tour, and we're going to do the second half of it. I can't cover all 12 nights in one tour. That would be simply too much information. So the second part of this thing I'm going to do at home, and we'll do the second of the 6 days. But let's start with Christmas Day. And you all know lots about Christmas Day. There's not much else I can tell you. We've done about its roots, its traditions, why it's synonymous with birth, renewal, the winter solstice, all those things. So I thought, as you know, I'm very interested in all things First War. Let's talk about one of those famous incidents that happened on Christmas Day in world history, which of course is the truce, December of 1914, an impromptu ceasefire that occurred on the Western Front during the First World War. A pause in fighting that was neither officially sanctioned, nor was it ever really given a start or a finish, but nonetheless, both sides, along a 30-mile stretch, decided to put down their weapons to celebrate Christmas. So the First World War had started with tremendous kind of relish and at tremendous speed. Everybody thought it'll be all over by Christmas. But after the first few months, when there was this tremendous sort of mobility, and the battle lines were moving miles at a time, it settled down into trench warfare, into attrition. Nobody was making any headway. And as the months gave way coming up towards winter and Christmas, the bad weather set in. We had storms, mud, and everyone was thoroughly miserable. So it's perhaps no wonder then that the troops were in the mood for a lift as they looked across the cold, kind of muddy morass of no man's land, of miserable sort of daily life. And they're only 50 yards apart. Only 50 yards, the two sets of soldiers. They've seen battle, but as yet, actually, they're not quite as scarred by what's going to come in the future. So perhaps they're slightly better disposed towards one another than they would be in years to come. The Pope had actually put out an appeal on December the 7th to call for a Christmas truce. So it wasn't an idea that was completely out of the blue, but it had been largely rejected by both sides. This idea that the guns might fall silent, at least upon the night the angels sing, was the Pope's request. But as I say, officially, it fell on deaf ears, but it didn't stop the soldiers on the front line seizing the initiative. And when a kind of outside event sort of seemed to provide a path to the truce that the leaders have rejected, they grabbed it with both hands. So as December the 25th approached, in the trench of coach, terrible rain and weather and mud, there was an invisible instruction that nobody officially gave that came to be termed as live and let live. In other words, if they're not shooting at you, don't shoot at them. Never official policy, but it meant that one by one, the combatants stopped firing. And we also know that there was a kind of light blanketing of dusting of snow in Flanders. So it contributed to kind of holiday atmosphere. And William II, the German emperor, sent Tannenbaums, Christmas trees, to the front line to kind of improve morale, to cheer up the troops. They were sent Christmas trees to kind of boost some morale. So on the 23rd of December, the Germans began to place the trees outside the trenches. They sang hymns such as Still Night, Silent Night. And the voices from the Allied lines responded with Christmas carols of their own. So whilst there was kind of relatively few British that spoke German, many Germans had worked in Britain before the war. And their experience kind of facilitated communication, particularly with the Saxons, who in particular were kind of credited with sort of initiating this dialogue with the British. And so soldiers on both sides regarded the Saxons as amiable and trustworthy. And the Christmas truce had its most success in the areas where British troops faced Saxon regiments. So the French, for instance, didn't get involved at all. So as kind of Christmas morn dawned, this unofficial truce was anchored. Both sides, without any involvement from high command, simply decided that they weren't going to fight on Christmas Day. It was begun by the Germans, that began to come and emerge from the trenches, holding up their hands, thank you, Fran, holding up their hands to demonstrate they weren't going to be a threat. There was no malice in this, and it seemed that the British soldiers were more than happy to take them at their gesture, and they also climbed out. And of course, famously, somebody produced a football, and a famous game of football was played out in no man's land on that day. Come the evening, they had a fabulous time together. They swapped gifts, and chocolate, shared photographs, stories from home. They retired to the trenches and, of course, took the day, held ceremonies to bury the dead. And both sides were said to be present as bodies from both sides of the struggle were interred. A true sense of brotherhood emerged across the barbed wire that Christmas Day. Of course, it couldn't last. By the following morning, the hostilities had resumed. But nonetheless, for that brief period of time, the magic of Christmas had descended upon one and all. And it was a wonderful thing to behold. Thank you, Deirdre. That's most kind. So, isn't it quiet tonight? Christmas Eve used to be so busy in York, and look at it now, it's almost deserted. So, Fran remembers her grandfather telling the story of the Christmas truce. What it's like to have a day of brotherhood? Absolutely. You'd like it to be more than a day, but there you go. It shows that, as I say, the Christmas, and of course, it's that sense, isn't it, of no matter where we're from culturally, if we share these same celebrations about Christmas, then of course, we are going to feel closer at this time of year. And that was the idea, of course, of Constantine, who we've talked about on our History of Christmas tours, passing Constantine just now. His idea was to use Christianity as a kind of glue to bring us all together with a shared narrative and a kind of shared story. Would have much more empathy to one another, but also be more valuable to be controlled. So he wasn't simply doing it to be nice. But yeah, so the policy, if you're going to live and let live, that starts in the British trenches, and it's all about the idea of if they're not shooting at you, don't shoot at them. So let me get a drink, and then we'll move on to our next day of Christmas, which of course is Boxing Day, the 26th of December. And we've talked about before on Christmas tours about St. Stephen's Day, Good King Wenceslas, you recall. Last went out on the Feast of Stephen. The Feast of Stephen was the 26th of December, so the day after Christmas Day. And St. Stephen was a saint that was associated with charity, with kind of good deeds, with looking after and caring for your fellow man. So you would think that all the celebrations around the 26th of December would be imbued with this kind of good spirit, wouldn't you? Hello, Adrian. But strangely, there is a rather barbarous celebration associated with the 26th of January, which is a bit of a hangover from this time. And it's wholly pagan. It's got nothing to do with the Christian festivals, and it's called the Hunt from the Wren. Now, has anybody heard of the Hunt for the Wren? Do let me know. So Natalie says, me being American, not understanding Boxing Day. So Boxing Day starts with the idea of charitable giving. So inspired by St. Stephen, Catholic Christian churchgoers, particularly those with money to spare, would be encouraged in the weeks leading up to Christmas to make donations into the boxes. The boxes were charity boxes, if you like, in the churches that were then distributed on St. Stephen's Day. So on the 26th of December, the day after Christmas Day, those without the resources were able, I suppose a food bank is our kind of modern sort of perspective on it, were able to get sort of support, without judgment, and kind of queue up. And so they were unboxed then. So the boxes were opened and they were then given little sort of Christmas presents and so forth. So that's where the term Boxing Day comes from, although it's also related to the fact that on Christmas Day it was the tradition for the monarch to give coinage to their household. So all the servants in the royal household were gifted money on the 26th, on St. Stephen's Day. But unlike sort of today where, the royal family is terribly rich and is a landowner and has got constant stream of income coming in, at different times during English history, we'll look at the east window while we're here, there was, looking good, a large amount of your staying elsewhere in the world, there was, times where the royal family was downright skinned. And in one particular year, in the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, the monarch was so short of cash, she simply just didn't have the readies to pay for her staff to be given a cash bonus. So she thinks, what can we do? What can I kind of do, give them instead that appears generous, but in really is a way of kind of saving cash? And so great, Terry said of 100 we're going to come back and talk about that in a sec, just doing Boxing Day. So consequently, they decide, well, the one thing they've got plenty of is food. So it's decided that on Boxing Day, St. Stephen's Day, rather than give the members of the royal household cash, instead they're going to get a bunch of cold cuts, all the stuff that's left over from all the feasting the day before. Imagine in the royal palace how much food there is on Christmas Day. Plenty left over. So box it up, they can have the afternoon off, they can go and spend it with their families, and there we go. So we've got kind of the cold meats, the cold cuts, the Christmas hamper, the time off celebrating Boxing Day for domestic staff, all kind of rolled into that, but really was a kind of penny pinching exercise rather than something that emerged with kind of good motivation. So anyway, hunting the wren. So as with so much at this time of year, you've got two set of celebrations going on. You've got one which is about Christian festivals. So the 26th of December is the Feast of St. Stephen. But you've also got this pagan celebration or pagan practice, which is called Hunt the Wren. Now, of course, as you may be aware, traditionally one of the biggest days in fox hunting in this country is Boxing Day. So the Boxing Day hunt is still culturally, and whilst, you know, it's banned, and I don't want to get into all everything that kind of goes with it. Most people are most agreed it should be outlawed. But what happens still is very, very close. It's very difficult to know to what degree the ban on horse-based hunting is really, policed, as you might say. But that's probably a hangover, so that we're associating the 26th of December as a day of hunting. So what we know is that this kind of solstice custom used to involve the hunting of the wren, and it traditionally took place on Boxing Day. And the custom lasted longest in Wales and the Isle of Man, and it still takes place today in Ireland, but before you get upset and jump all over the Irish, it's more symbolic, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And let's have a look in the window of the National Trust shop. We'll start doing some shop windows, because it's always nice to have a look in the windows, isn't it? So a description from 1840 describes it as this. So this is a description of the hunting of the wren from 1840. For some weeks, I'll get your notes down there, for some weeks preceding Christmas, crowds of village boys may be seen peering into hedges in search of the tiny wren. And when one is discovered, the whole assemble and give wage a chase until they've slain the little bird. In the hunt, the utmost excitement prevails, shouting, screeching, and rushing. All sorts of missiles are flung at the puny mark. From bush to bush and hedge to hedge is the wren pursued until bagged, and as much pride and pleasure as the cock of the woods by the more ambitious sportsman. On the anniversary of St. Stephen, the enigma is explained. So attached to a huge holly bush, elevated on a pole, the bodies of several little wrens are borne about through the streets in a procession, and every now and then stopping before some popular house and there singing the wren's song. Now, there's various versions that have survived, and here's an excerpt from one that I kind of found. And it scans awfully. It's not at all kind of modern way. But anyway, I'll do my best to kind of give life to it. But the Song of the Wren, then. So, the wren, the king of all birds, on St. Stephen's Day was caught in the furs. Though his body is small, his family is great. So if it please your honour, give us a treat. On Christmas Day I turned a spit. I burnt my finger. I feel it yet. Up with the kettle, down with the pan. Give us some money to bury the wren. So the kind of antiquity of this kind of rather barbaric custom is clear enough. And at one time, the wren was known as the king of the birds. And you may have come across this. This is one of those, like, I'm not sure if it's an Aesop kind of story, but it's sort of one of those sort of stories that kind of, like how the elephant got his tusk sort of idea. And all the birds have a competition to see who is the king amongst the birds. It does seem that the honour of then slaying the king of the birds was that representation of the dying year, when the old is sacrificed for the good of the land. So kind of like so much in kind of culture, there's this idea, isn't it, of destruction has to come ahead of growth. It's like the burning of the fields, or Shivna, is it, who dances in Hindu culture at the edge of time between kind of chaos and creation. This sense of that before something new can be created, before a new harvest, a new growth, you have to cut back the old, destroy it. The old has to go for the new one to come in. If you think of the New Year celebrations, we've got the old man of time whose death, haven't we, but also the baby. So it's the same idea. So the wren is the king of the birds. So how does the wren become the king of the birds? Well, a parliament is held amongst the birds to decide who is going to have the title of the king of the birds. And at the gathering of the birds, it's decided to elect a king by seeing which could fly the highest, who could fly up nearest to the sun. And the eagle's broad, strong wings bore it higher and faster than any other bird could compete with. And it was about to claim its prowess and celebrate its victory as the king of the birds when it became aware of a whirchuk sound. And it turned round to discover that little wren had flown yet higher than the eagle because he was cheekily perched upon the eagle's back. So it's in this way that the wren became known as the king of the birds. And for many years, during the 18th and 19th centuries, the Irish wren boys were accompanied by masked geezers, including the ubiquitous lairbarn or white mare. But nowadays, perhaps due to a shortage of wrens and are somewhat more kind of bird conscious, they don't kill the birds. They're seldom hunted at all. But when the wren boys circulate in Ireland, they proceed from house to house with a decorated cage as if to symbolise how they would capture and keep the wren. So that sort of tradition is still kept alive, but thankfully now without the animal cruelty. So I'd be interested to hear if any of you were aware of the story of the wren, the hunting of the wren, the 26th of December. So many fascinating little bits of culture, of Christmas, some Christian, some pagan, and all of them celebrated in the 12 days of Christmas. The 12 days of Christmas is nominally Christian, but as with so much else, scratch the surface, and you find plenty pagan elements. So, let's have a drink. Let's go on to our third day of Christmas. Hope you're enjoying the Christmas lights, and we're going to have a walk down the shambles of Stonegate, the pretty streets. Never heard that one. Thank you, Tish. Good. So the third day brings the feast of the most beloved of the apostles. So the apostle John was known to be the favourite of Jesus. He sits beside him at the Last Supper and drinks the wine, and he's particularly associated with wine. So the third day of Christmas is the feast of St. John. And boys, and bear in mind John used to be this popular name for all boys everywhere. Hello. And of course my name. But there's a version, it's said, in every language of John. Ian, who's also out tonight, Scott's version of John. Johan. Sean, Irish. There are versions of John in all the major languages, we're told. So there'll be lots of them. And John's, on the festival, the feast day of St. John, were allowed to light the candles. So they were given privileged status. And in the medieval Catholics, they really, had a big thing for the adoration of the Apostle of Love, as he was known. Sounds like Barry White, the Apostle of Love. But that was St. John, rather than a sort of fat soul singer. And no celebration was complete without being able to drink some of St. John's wine. I mean, seriously, everything from, marriages, people kind of coming together, people on the deathbed would be given a sip of it. In extreme unction, at the end of your life, you'd have some St. John's blessed wine on your lips. It was soaked into kind of bread biscuits so it would make it last all through the year. So on St. John's Day, medieval households would bring their finest wine from their cellars to have it blessed in the honour of St. John. And the wine was given the name of the love of St. John. So Johannes, there you go, another Johannes, another version of John. It's literally, it's there in all these different cultures. So the love of St. John, Johannes Minne, in German, and every member of the household received at least a sip of it during a meal on the 27th of December as a sign of unity with St. John. And in some areas, the wine was served warm with sugar and spices. So obviously the mulled wine and also the bowl of wassail, very much kind of in line with that kind of tradition of warm, spiced wine. And I'm sure many of you will be familiar with The Sound of Music. Some of you may even have read the story of Maria von Trapp, who of course is the Maria in the story in Austria, and she goes on and describes the ceremony of the Feast of St. John and the wine blessing in Austria, obviously very culturally very, very close to Germany. And what she says is that just before the meal begins, everybody stands up holding a glass while the father and mother begin the St. John's Day ceremony. The father touches the mother's glass with his glass, looks at her in the eyes and says, "I drink to you to the love of St. John." And the mother answers, "I thank you for the love of St. John." And they both take a sip. So then the mother turns to the oldest child, repeats the words, and the child answers, "I thank you for the love of St. John." Have we got any people being brought up in Catholic culture on? If you have, do let me know if these are things that you recognise, or if all this seems to be rather strange and alien. So it's 27th of December we're talking about. So the child repeats these. "I thank you for the love of St. John." And Maria goes on to say that again, they take a sip. The child turns to the next oldest. And so it goes around the table until the last one turns to the father and the family circle is closed. So we've got a Christmassy ghosts here. You know. So Catholics from all the way across Central Europe are still continue to bring their wine and cider to the church to be blessed on this day. So according to the Golden Legend, which is kind of the writing down of many of these kind of myths and stories and legends, Aristodemus, the high princess of Diana, strove to incite the populace against John. So John the Apostle tried to get the people to rise up, and obviously this is during his lifetime, and cause his death. The threat from the early apostles, most of whom, of course, as you'll know, died the deaths of martyrs. So to obtain this end, Aristodemus offered a cup of poisoned wine to St. John, declaring that if the apostle could drink the poison unharmed, then he would convert to Christianity. So the story goes that St. John took the cup, he blessed it, and drank without feeling any ill effect whatsoever. Now, some legends recount the poison rose out of the chalice in the form of a serpent after St. John had blessed it. And this miracle is often depicted of St. John holding a cup out of which a snake slithers. So this was portrayed in the celebrations of the 27th of December. And this miracle has caused Catholics to treasure every last drop of St. John's wine. Catholic families stored a portion of the wine in a special place in their house to be brought out to be drunk at different occasions throughout the year. And as I say, it would also be held for christenings, for marriages, when people were sick and ill, people on their deathbeds. As part of extreme unction, you'd have the love of St. John touching on your lips. And of course, this is, a very literal take on the wine of the Last Supper, the blood of Christ. So, interesting. I think that's a nice Christmas tree here. We're on, here on Petergate in York. Named after St. Peter, of course, another of the apostles. So that is the 27th, the third day of Christmas. And if anybody's familiar with the feast of St. John. But let's move on. So the fourth day of Christmas is the 28th of December, of course. And for most of us, of course, living in the Northern Hemisphere, it's the darkest month. And of course, that's why we put up lights, isn't it, this time of year? Now with electrical lights, but in years gone by, all the way back to the Romans, low Saturnalia, they'll be carrying torches. From the darkness, we tried to create light. Obviously to make us feel a bit better, less depressed, a bit warmer, but also to remind us that in time to come, the light will return, and with it, the power of light to generate the sun producing food, the harvest. So we're sustained by light and warmth. So it's easy to kind of see how festivals around this time of year embrace brightness, feasting, overindulgence, sort of communal jollity, because it kind of gets over the hump days. As these long days around the winter solstice, that we're just about at the end of it. Tomorrow is the great resetting of the celestial clock on the 25th of December. The wheel starts to turn once again in the Northern Hemisphere. The day becomes precisely 1 minute longer. and we start to tip towards the sun, longer and warmer days will finally be upon us. But only very gradually, only a little at a time. Let's have a look at the Christmas gifts in the cat gallery. So we'll talk about the Feast of Fools in just a second. Let's have a look what's in the Christmas display of the cat gallery, because I know there are many amongst you that always want to see what is for sale in this most Yorkish of shops. So hopefully they've had a good year, and many people have put money through the till, so they'll be here this time next year, to celebrate. Oh, look at that Bagpuss. I used to love Bagpuss as a child. Don't know if you've seen Bagpuss. That's crossed over the Atlantic. It's a marvellous show. Have a look on YouTube if not. It's absolutely beautiful. Look at that cosy kitten. Isn't that beautiful? Days already start getting longer, 1 minute per day. So the Feast of Fools, I don't know if you're kind of familiar with this. So even when the kind of Christian church was kind of in control, really, much more of the narrative than you probably say it is today, there was certainly a tolerance that, you know, there was going to be at this time of year when it's dark and it's cold and people have got to work, you know, and it's not a lot of fun, that putting it with a certain amount of jollity was just probably a good way of managing populations. Yeah, we've got 5 guys in York. Yep, absolutely. So the Feast of Fools. And if you have a look on the website, You Catholic, it lists some of the hijinks that occurred during the Feast of Fools. It says altars were transformed into gambling tables. There was chanted parodies of hymns. Vestments were worn backwards by the priests. Donkeys were led into church, would obligingly bray noisily. There'd be masked dancers and cross-dressing. So everything that you'd imagine, really, to be really the antitheses of a Christian celebration was embraced during the Feast of Fools. And a particular focus of the Feast of Fools was something that was known as the festivals of the boy bishops. Have we heard of the boy bishops before? And I've talked briefly about boy bishops on Christmas tours in years gone by, but I don't know how many would have been around to pick up and hear that. So the boy bishops, the idea was that, a bit like the Roman idea of Saturnalia, of this inversion, this idea of a kind of king for the day. And we hang on, by the way, to the idea of a king for the day when we have a little crown, don't we, in our Christmas crackers, which is a kind of a nice little hangover, a nice little echo, thank you, of that tradition of being, thank you, Linda, of being a king for a day. So the boy bishops, a boy was chosen an altar boy on the 6th of December, the festival of St. Nicholas, a day dedicated, of course, to the Christian Church's childhood, and then all the way through until the 28th of December, which is then the Feast of the Holy Innocents. So that is the feast day that is associated with, remember, the slaughter of the babies and the children by Herod. He instructs all the children, all the male children under the age of 2 to be slaughtered. So that's commemorated on the Feast of the Holy Innocents, which is also on the 28th of December, which is the culmination of the Feast of Fools. So on the 28th of December, that's the absolute kind of crescendo, you know, of all this silliness. And it's the night where the child has to hand back the robes. But believe it or not, during the period from the 6th of December through to the 28th, the boy bishops, the child, the altar boy that was chosen to be a bishop, had the full power of a Christian bishop. They were given the ring, the mitre, the hat, everything. So consequently, it was about as nuts as you can imagine of putting children in control. They would demand that everyone would give them free sweets and so forth, and toys and presents. It's a kind of crazy idea, and it's really hard to reconcile and square it with, you know, Orthodox Christianity, other than to say, I think they realised that, as I say, you couldn't crack down too hard, and that these things have been around for a long, long time. They were pagan by root, and it's very, very easy to say we're going to get rid of the old traditions. It's a lot harder in practice to do so. So it seems that the church took a fairly sort of sanguine approach to these sort of medieval kind of hangovers. They tolerated them. They allowed them, or at least they did so, until such time as the Tudors came along, and they hated it. So Henry VIII banned the boy bishops, not least because about 50 years earlier, there was a notorious situation where in Exeter, the boy bishop died during his reign. And what this meant was that he was then buried, thank you, Polly, with full regalia. And if you go into Exeter Cathedral, you can see the tomb of the boy bishop. So, these things can happen because you'd given them sort of full power over the church. So consequently, in dying during that period, they died as a bishop and they got all the funereal kind of response that you'd expect. So it was kind of this sort of insanity as part of the sort of Feast of Fools, which can sound very strange. It sort of sounds more like kind of Ibiza Uncovered than kind of Songs of Praise, if you're going to know those kind of references in terms of the way that people were behaving. But I think the idea underlying it, which I rather like, is that debauchery, God loved benignly, and he was going to let people off, and he understood that you need to kind of cut loose and have fun. And from time to time, in these dark, long, hard months, if a bit of kind of tomfoolery and a bit of fun was had, then that was a price that was okay. He was prepared to pay that price, no matter how kind of raucous or foolish the behaviour was in the mortal realm. There was time throughout the rest of the year. That's. Sorry, Natalie, Tip, John, thank you, Natalie. So what went wrong on YouTube? We'll see it later. Merry Christmas, John. Thank you, Natalie. I'm much appreciated. So a common feature, as I say, was the election of the boy bishops. So we'll go down here because I think there's we'll go and find one of the little soldiers. So this was phased out during Henry VIII. He was then brought back by his daughter Mary because, of course, she was a rampant Catholic. She loved nothing better than the mythology of the Catholic Church. But then her half-sister Elizabeth I sort of banned it for good. But interestingly, it's made a comeback. Since about the kind of 2012, I think, it's brought back Exeter, and now one or two other cathedrals have started to do it. Now, they don't give the full powers to a child, but they do allow them to make children receive a bag of sweets every day, and this, that, and the other. So it's kind of a nice idea, and it's kind of making a comeback. So that one of our nutcrackers of York and up and about. So where we were, let me just take a sip of water and then we'll move on to the 5th day of Christmas, because my goodness me, the time moves on, and we need to have a look. What haven't we done yet? We haven't done the shambles, have we? So we'll head down there and hopefully we've got plenty of time to do the shambles justice. So where are we? So let's have a look at this nutcracker up close. I've lost the lid of my water, so I'm going to stick that in my pocket so it doesn't spill everywhere. So yeah, normal service was resumed after the 28th, after the Feast of Fools, and Christians were reminded to refocus on their scriptures. And there was a reminder that you'd probably be very familiar with, and that was the 4 calling hens, because as you can remember, hopefully all of you will know, that the present on the 4th day of Christmas my true love brought to me 4 calling hens. Now then, did you know the 4 calling hens refer to the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke and John? They are calling us back to prayer and sanity after the Feast of Fools. So again, we've got a really nice kind of blendy mix between Christianity and pagan belief that is kind of wound through something as odd as, the Feast of Fools, but ends up back at the Gospels and be sort of official forms of prayer. So it's something very wonderful about the way Christmas just blends these two. So looking here again in Barley Hall, I don't know how well you can see from here, but you've got garlands of ivy. And ivy do come through, eternal, the lifeblood of the planet. It's the 4 calling birds, absolutely. So, it is distinctly pagan. It's ivy, it's Anglo-Saxon. So modernate, if you remember, we've talked about this on tours gone by, about how the celebration of birth and fertility at Christmas, although they didn't call it Christmas, of course. So you've got this interweaving between in the medieval period at least, between the pagan and the Christian, and just an accommodation really, sort of between the two, of just accepting that, the old traces stay, but just trying to shape it back into a kind of coherent narrative. So yeah, have your fun, have your Feast of Fools, do your silly stuff, but then the calling hens will bring you back to prayer, to orthodoxy, and back to behaving in the kind of correct way. So I think that's kind of interesting. So I say Henry VIII banned it. There was no more Feast of Fools after that, rather after his daughter. So the fifth day of Christmas, there isn't much to sort of say about this one. And I had to really kind of dig around, but came across something I hadn't really heard of before. It's only been heard of TikTok Day, associated with the 29th of December. Do let me know in the comments if you have heard of TikTok Day. So it's a relatively modern phenomenon, and it's observed on December the 29th. And it serves as a reminder to complete the unfinished tasks and prepare for the upcoming year. So when we do part 2 of this tour, we'll be talking about New Year, about resolutions, about promises, about the calends, about going backwards and forwards, Roman gods, 2 heads, all this stuff. So it's very closely kind of related to all that stuff. So TikTok Day is also known as Still Need to Do Day, and was created to encourage individuals to wrap up any outstanding tasks before the year ends. So it's a kind of prompt to get your shit together before New Year. And this day provides opportunity to reflect on personal and professional goals. And I don't think it's TikTok the channel. I think it predates that. It's quite a bit older, but still kind of relatively modern, 20th century. So it provides opportunity to reflect on personal and professional goals, kind of ensuring you start the new year with a clean slate, which is a very Roman idea. We're going to talk about that in the next tour, which will be next week. It emphasises the importance of completing tasks that may have been postponed during the busy holiday season, allowing for a fresh start in January. We all love the idea, don't we, of starting afresh. So basically, it's a day of tidying up, I suppose, between it's that kind of gap, middle period, isn't it, between the festivities of Christmas has died down. We're not quite started New Year. Good opportunity to declutter. A lot of time now, people don't wait till 12th night to take the decorations down. They might take them down in this period. I suppose it's part of that clearing up, is it wanting to greet the new year with clarity. Personally, I still stick with the 12th night for taking down decorations. I know some people do. So interestingly, let me know. Are you ones that like the house clear of Christmas decorations for New Year? I know a lot of people do. So I'm not saying one's right or one's wrong, simply that we have different kind of ways of doing this. So it's TikTok. Yeah, TikTok, exactly, Sarah. So TikTok spelled like that. So it's not the Chinese T-I-K, T-O-K. It's T-I-C-K. Hickory dickory dock. TikTok, right? The clock. So TikTok, absolutely, TikTok Day. And it was founded by Thomas and Ruth Roy, who are known for sort of creating various light-hearted observances. And they began adding days to the calendar in the 1980s and the 1990s to fill kind of perceived gaps in how people celebrate every day. So TikTok Day is included in a thing called Chaser's Calendar of Events, which catalogues both unofficial and official holidays around the world. And so if you're going to celebrate TikTok Day, so I'll give you a few days' notice. You've got, four days to get yourself organised for this. Get yourself a list of unfinished tasks and use this day to tackle the things on your to-do list, either personal goals or work-related tasks. You can reflect on your achievements, take a moment to appreciate what you've accomplished in the past year, and identify areas for improvement. You can set new goals for the upcoming year and create action plans to reach them. So it's very much a kind of organisy kind of, get your life together kind of mindset, isn't it? You could organise your space. You could clean and declutter your living and working environments to create a fresh start. Also connect with loved ones, people you haven't perhaps been in touch with over the last year, that you don't want another year to go by, without refreshing that relationship. So drop a letter to them, write an email, send a card, pick up the phone. Do something, around friends and family. So TikTok Day is not an official public holiday, but it's kind of gained popularity as a symbolic moment of reflection and productivity, effectively encouraging everyone to make the most of the time left in the year. So the shambles is nearly upon us. So Susan doesn't take us down till 12th night. Unlucky to do so, quite right too. I have to agree with that, but as I say, increasingly there is a mindset, a kind of practice to bring down decorations earlier. But then again, I think they go up a lot earlier than they certainly used to. I mean, again, let us know when are you starting to put this up? There's a lot of people for whom now I think the sort of last weekend in November is kind of the normal time to be putting up decorations. Seems to me crazy early, But there we go. It's times change, traditions change, and I think that's what's kind of interesting about us is there's something about Christmas that we like repetitions, don't we? But that actually, as generations change, so the traditions change as well, and so we find ourselves being old curmudgeons complaining that things aren't what they used to be. Now, Laurie doesn't take us down until mid-February. Well, that of course is in line with the original Christmas tide. It was right up till February. But not many of us now would recognise that. The 12 Days of Christmas has come to overtake sort of Christmas tide as the main way of kind of celebrating. So, coming into the shambles, let's talk about the 6th day of Christmas. I'm just going to civil. So don't put mine up till early December, says Catherine. So, yeah, you sort of put it in the middle end. Not one of the earliest, not one of the latest. Some people... I've Sinterklaas, so December the 5th. So you're leaving it very late, aren't you? Because obviously Santa Claus is coming. Obviously the Dutch St. Nicholas, the gift giver in the Netherlands, will kind of visit on the night of the 5th. So thereafter, that's time to prepare. That's kind of interesting from Natalie there. So the 6th day, the 30th of December, the 6th day of Christmas. Who can remember what the gift of the 12 days of Christmas is on the 6th day of Christmas? So Linda doesn't take her Christmas down till the little Christmas is over. It's nice. I'm glad that we've got some traditionalists on. But like I say, the world is changing, and it would be remiss of me to start criticising your choices. But I think that it's the nicest day. I'm so sorry to hear that. January 3rd will be a bad day for you. But of course, it is one of the 12 days of Christmas, and we will be talking about it. And hopefully, we'll create some positive associations, Natalie, if you can bear to join us. It won't be on the 3rd of January, it'll be before that. But hopefully, I'll give you something positive to perhaps at least detract to a degree from the 3rd of January. So, Monday, Christian Epiphany, which is, of course, the 6th of January, the night after 12th night. So, we'll be talking about that on the second half of this tour. So, let's get finished. We've got a couple of 10 minutes left of the schedule. And we're on the shambles. Hopefully it's Christmassy enough for you down here. Let's talk about the Christmas day. So, what was the present? Did anybody manage to tell us on the 6th day of Christmas? It does look rather nice, doesn't it? Look rather pretty. It was 6 geese a-laying. And this symbolises the 6 days of creation and new life. So, we're back, albeit via a kind of, again, a birthing pagan sort of perspective to bring it back to the Christian narrative. So it's all really rather clever, I think, that, somebody has kind of gone out of the way to think, how can we kind of draw links and parallels between these kind of rather sort of pagan, prosaic, natural, renewal, harvest, birth and rebirth, and keep bringing it back to the kind of Christian church. So, on the 6th day, we've got, in the 12 days of Christmas, we've got the geese a-laying. And this symbolises 6 days of creation as described in the book of Genesis, where God creates the world, the life of the world. So the geese also represent fertility and new beginnings. So again, we've got a really kind of interesting blend here between the focus on creation and reproduction. And one is decidedly pagan and one is decidedly Orthodox Christian. Not that Christians have anything against reproduction, but it doesn't really push it, does it, as you might say. In fact, one philosopher once said, the history of the religions of the world can be split between religions, on the one hand, that wanting to have lots of sex, and the others want to have no sex whatsoever. So I'll leave you to decide where your own personal belief sits on either side of those. But the focus on new life and fertility is decidedly kind of pagan in its origin. So the goose, of course, lays eggs, and eggs are symbols of new life. And appropriately, in the Christian church, it is the Feast of St. Egwin, which is just too perfect for words, the Feast of St. Egwin. And the 6th day of Christmas, then, is associated with the Feast of St. Egwin of Worcester in England, who died on this day in 717 AD. And he was known as his role as a protector of orphans and widows, and for founding the Benedictine monastery at Evesham in England. And his feast day emphasises themes of family and protection and aligning with the spirit of the season. So the 12 days of Christmas, obviously beginning on the 25th of December until January the 5th, the festive season of the calendar Each day with its own significance, and the gifts mentioned reflect the various aspects of Christian teaching and traditions. So the sixth day, with its focus on creation and family, highlights the importance of life and community during this celebratory period. So there we go. We've got you up to the sixth day. There's 12 days in total. You've actually had a bonus day, haven't you? Because we did a little bit about Christmas Eve. And so we are nearly done. But as I'm going to be walking back towards the car, we've got a couple of minutes to spare. Let's just kind of have a walk down. We'll continue looking in the windows. So part 2 of this tour will be later on in a few days' time. And we're going to cover the days of Christmas from 7 through to 12, so all the way up to 12th night, which of course then means New Year. So we're going to talk about a lot of the history and the traditions of New Year. So we've talked a lot about Christmas, but there's just as much to talk about when it comes to Christmas. Hi, how are you? Give us a wave, yeah.
Merry Christmas.
There you go, Janie, how's that? You don't have to go out into York to see your hero. There she is. So that's the wonderful Shadows of York ghost tour. If you're in York, that is definitely one that is highly recommended. And a good time will be had by all. I don't know if Janie's still with us, but no doubt she'll be thrilled to have seen her Buzz and Buzzy there. If she's not, we'll drop her a message to say that she must dine in around 56 minutes and she'll get a little glimpse of Shadows of York there, doing her bit, telling great stories on the streets of York. So, yeah, there she is. Janie's still on. Yeah, my wee pal, Mackenzie, that's it. Fantastic. So here we are, look. We've got the church lit up. So I'm not entirely sure what the copper gets to look like, but as I'm walking down that way, let's kind of stay on. So, yeah, so we'll do the second half of this story. So we'll do the associated days from the 7th, which, of course, is going to be the 31st. It's got New Year's Eve stories, New Year's Day, the calends. We've got all the Roman myths and stories and cultures and all those strange little things. So if you've got any, just tell me before I go, because I'll just try and weave them in to the next half of this, which will be about New Year. Have you got any peculiar stories or things that used to happen to you as children to celebrate New Year? We know, of course, about sort of first footing in Scotland. We're going to talk about that and various other bits and pieces. But if you've got any nice little stories or anecdotes, do drop me a line, pop it on my Facebook page, or let me know now. And we can have a look and we can discover and try and work out what that's all about. Because every bit like Christmas, also New Year, which obviously they're so close to each other, we think about it as Christmas and New Year. But of course, they're quite separate in terms of their sort of cultural reference points and the stories. But again, we've got this central idea, haven't we, of birth and death. The death of an old year, the birth of a new year, fresh starts, renewal, the opportunity to be better, to grow. So that, you know, after the celebration of the year at Christmas, where we kind of down tools and we relax and, you know, perhaps take some time out, recharge our batteries, reconnect the sort of social bonds and familial bonds that people might not have seen for a long time. Hopefully we can reunite, and even if we can't do it in person, these days with the magic of video calls, we can hopefully at least chat and see each other's faces, you know, over the holidays. Is then, you know, we're all faced with a new year, and there's something, isn't there, about a new year that leaves us wanting or desiring, you know, for improvement, whether that's personal improvement, whether it's job improvement, whether it's academic improvement, whether it's, you know, hoping our kids can, you know, get a better shot, get a promotion, whatever it is, there's something, isn't there, about New Year that makes us kind of start. So Susan's got coal and coins that are ready. We'll talk about those coal, the importance of coal for New Year. So there's all these kind of, you know, elements that can writ just as much into New Year as in Christmas. So it's not one festival, it's kind of two, is it? They just happen to be very, very close together. And of course, we're also confronted by the fact that our calendars are messed up big time. So when we talk about the dates around the year, we can't talk with any real certainty because we've got the Roman calendar, we've got the Julian calendar. You know, we don't have an agreed set of dates. The only things we can really use for certain are the solstice, the movement of the constellations and the sun. So that is, of course, what cemented the fact that we do this stuff every year and at the same time of year is about the movements of the night sky rather than specific dates in the calendar. But of course, 25th of December has become synonymous to us with this idea of rebirth. And since the earliest times, from the earliest civilizations, the 25th of December has been associated with birth and renewal, which of course is the reason why it's the birthday of Horus and about 1,000 other minor gods. And of course, it's the reason why the Christian church decided that symbolically it was the best date for us to go for to celebrate the birthday of Jesus Christ. Because, of course, as many of you will know, it doesn't stipulate in the Bible when Jesus was born. So they had to give him a date. And so this affected date that everyone was celebrating anyway, during the Midwinter Festival, made absolute sense. So 25th of December is a date that is linked not simply to the Christian church, but rather to the mechanics of the planet. In the northern hemisphere, that's the day where we're starting to tip in towards the beginnings of what's going to become summer, longer, warmer days. And what we would hope for, of course, is lots of nice things to eat, a good harvest, a year of plenty. So Christmas, midwinter prayer for the harvest, is imbued with hope for the future. So it's not simply a new year that's characterised by our thinking about how we can be better and how we hope things will play out better for us and our loved ones, or for our country, maybe our football team, maybe our sports team. Who knows what it is that we're wishing for? But there's something about this time of year that makes us start to identify and focus as we kind of try and declutter our homes. We're also trying to declutter our lives, our emotions, press a reset, and hope that somehow, in some way, we can achieve the things that we want for ourselves, for our loved ones, for our sports teams, for our finances, for nature, for politics. Who knows what it is that we want, what we aspire to. We hope that the new year will bring it to us. And so, it seems entirely fitting that on this night before Christmas, the night before Christmas, when nothing stirred, the poem where we started, that we end up our tour at the Wishing Tree, where we can wish one another a very Merry Christmas. I don't know if there's other tours you're going on, so you can continue this. But if not, and you're parting here and it's the last of your virtual tours today, do take the opportunity to wish one another a happy Christmas Day. And if you're going to be on your own tomorrow, that I know there's tours, that Ian is touring, that Natalie is touring, so don't be alone tomorrow. Be part of this virtual community and feel the love, feel the connection. And wherever you are in the world, I wish you all a very happy Christmas. And I hope that 2026 brings lovely things. We'll end our tour here, as we traditionally do, with a minute at the Wishing Tree. This is the place we come to bury our wishes, the cold, hard ground, and hope that by the spring they'll come and they'll grow into reality. So thank you, everybody. It's been lovely to spend this Christmas Eve with you. We're going to have a minute at the Wishing Tree, and I'll bid you good night. Thank you, everybody, and happy Christmas.